Welcome to the Agent of Wealth podcast with Marc Bautis from Bautis Financial. In this podcast, Marc helps guide you towards financial freedom, ensure you never run out of money, and create a balance in life that prioritizes what is most important to you. Join us for this journey as Marc draws from years of expertise and guest experts to solve the multiple wealth building challenges involved in your financial life.
Welcome back to the Agent of Wealth. This is your host, Marc Bautis. On today's show, we brought on a special guest, Emily Guy Birken. Emily is a former educator, lifelong money nerd, and a Plutus Award-winning freelance writer specializing in the scientific research behind irrational money behaviors. She's the author of 5 books, including The 5 Years Before You Retire and Stacked, your super serious guide to modern money management, written with Joe Saul-Sehy. Emily, welcome to the show.
Thank you for having me.
The latest book you wrote, Stacked. What inspired you to write that one?
So Joe he's a podcaster. He has a podcast called Stacking Benjamins. And his goal with Stacking Benjamins is to bring a lighthearted approach to finance. So he actually came up with the idea for Stacked, and then he brought me on board. He had been wanting to write a book for quite some time and realized that it was going to be a lot more effective if he could bring a co-author on. And I had written 4 books prior to this, and he thought, I knew the ropes, I'd be a good partner. I was super excited about it because I try to bring a little bit of humor into everything that I do, all of my writing. And unfortunately, it often gets edited out because a lot of my financial clients, they just want the facts, just the facts about whatever it is I'm writing about.
Right.
So even the gentle humor that I will sometimes put in will get edited out. Stacked was an opportunity for me to just kind of let my humor off the leash and really have fun with it. And that was a very exciting creative prospect for me. And Joe and I had a great time kind of writing things for each other. So we split up the book. There's 14 chapters. We each took 7, and we wrote the first draft of the 7 chapters and then switched. And so I'm writing things going like, oh, Joe's going to laugh at this. And he's writing things going like, oh, this is going to crack Emily up. And it was just a really fun and unique writing experience for me because it's very different from how I've done my other books.
Yeah, and I recently read it. It's a great book. And like you said, the humor kind of drives home some of the points or some of the things that, you're trying to make. Whereas you don't see that in, in other books or just in the whole financial industry in general. Like you said, it's kind of the facts. And I also like that there were a lot of stories in the book as well, because I think people relate to those. But one of the things is in the title, it talks about modern money management. What's changed? What is modern money management?
So in some ways, money has not changed since the time of our great-grandparents, in that a lot of the same actions and skills are going to lead to good money outcomes now as they did when our grandparents were young. So, and I'm thinking of things like planning ahead, creating a budget, tracking your income and expenditures. All of those things are basics. What's different is there are so many more ways to spend money and to invest money and to earn money these days than there were in our grandparents' time. That means that we need to, for one thing, kind of put different guardrails around our money compared to what previous generations had to do. So you might remember that very old piece of advice of freezing your credit card in a block of ice, because it would be there in case of an emergency if you really needed it, but it would keep you from spending money just because you were tempted. So that doesn't work anymore because Amazon very helpfully remembers your credit card information for you.
Right.
Freezing it in a block of ice is not going to do anything. That's where the change comes in terms of modern money management, is finding new ways to put those kinds of guardrails around your money weaknesses, because we all have them. We all have things that we don't make optimal decisions with our money. And we have to find new and different ways of handling those less than optimal decisions to make sure that we are reaching our financial goals.
One of the topics that I found interesting in the book was around goal setting. Even when I work with people, I'll start off, the conversation with about goals or what's important to them. And some people, they can rattle off 10 to 15 different things that they're looking to do. And then there are other people who, they're like, oh, someday I want to retire and I don't want to run out of money, but then that's about it. Is there a way to, or how do you guide someone along that path, one, without leading them, but also so that they can articulate what is important to them. Or I think the book does mention it, the money or investing, it's really for something. But what if they don't know what it's for? How do you kind of guide them to try and figure that out?
So there's two sides to this. So with the people who are like, well, I want to retire someday, but I don't really know what that means. I want to make sure I don't run out of money, but I don't really know what that means. For folks who are in that category, I think it's really helpful to ask them to like sit and visualize what an ideal day in retirement will look like, what an ideal week, an ideal month, and an ideal year would look like. And so like really think about it. Think about like, what would I be doing? How would I spend my morning? What would I eat for breakfast? What would I do each month? What are things that would repeat year after year? That can kind of help people who are not necessarily, that kind of goal oriented to figure out what it is that they want and figure out what they value, because that can often be the problem is, I'm so used to my life as it is right now, I can't think about what it's going to be later. Like I don't have any idea. And so that exercise can be really, really helpful, because it forces you to get like very granular in like what's my day going to look like, and much more global in what's my year going to look like. And then that can kind of start the connections going as you're thinking about how much money would I need if I do want to travel once a year? How much money do I need if I want to, be spending my days, on the golf course or, wherever it is. That's one aspect. The other side that I think is really helpful is to do something that Joe introduced me to, as in the book. It's called timelining your goals. Every single financial book out there, for the most part, starts with write down your goals. And that's a great place to start, because studies have shown if you write down your goals, you're much more likely to reach them. Writing them down can be helpful for the sorts of people who are like, I don't know what I want, but actually, taking a pen and paper and writing it down, like that kind of forces your brain to think through it and go to, well, yeah, I've always wanted to travel to Greece. And oh, yeah, I wanted to do that. The problem with just writing down your goals, though, is that you're not necessarily looking at them on a timeline. You're not looking at them as something that will happen in a period of time that you can plan for. For instance, a real common one is you might say, like, I want to retire at 57 and I want to put my kids through college. And in your head, you're like, okay, so age 57 is 14 years from now, and I have a 7-year-old child. And you're not thinking about when they'll be in college. 14 years from now, they'll be 21 and probably junior or senior in college. Is that going to work? Does that math add up? What we suggest in the book is to actually create a timeline, get out a piece of paper, draw yourself as a little stick figure, just because that drawing's a lot more fun than not drawing, and draw a line from stick figure to the other end of the page, and then start putting things in on where your ages are and what things will happen. So if you want to retire at 57 and you want to put your kids through school, by doing this on this timeline, you'll go, oh, whoops, there's an overlap there. Will I be able to afford that? Okay. And then that gets you started thinking about like, okay, well, what do I value? Is it more important to me to make sure that I pay for my kids' college, or is it more important to me to retire at 57? And then you can start kind of using like a sliding scale, or like, okay, I'd be willing to push back my retirement a year or two. But I also think it's probably a good idea to have junior pay for part of their college. And, we can figure out how that's going to happen. And you're having a lot more dynamic conversations and ideas about your goals than you would if you just wrote down retire at 57, put kids through college.
This process that you're talking about, do you promote using some kind of technology to really not just put timeline or put down your goals, but then like the second part of, oh, am I going to have enough to be able to do both? Or how do I prioritize? Or can I retire? Do you promote using technology for it, or some of the old school ways of Excel or pen and paper that people would use?
I think that what's going to work best for people is what they are most comfortable with. So, some people you say like, okay, there's all these calculators, there's these apps you can put, and they're like, whoa, no, 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 no. I don't want, I don't want my financial information on something that's on the cloud, and so like, okay, all right, well then, you can purchase, you can use Excel, you can purchase things and do this yourself. And then there are other people who are like, I don't even remember high school math. And if you're asking me to math, I'm not going to do well. You can say, oh, well, that's not a problem. If you're comfortable with using apps, if you're comfortable with using websites, they can do the calculations for you. And then you can make the decisions with the information they provide. And so that's something that I think it really depends on the individual. I do think that there is an amazing, just huge number of incredible calculators and apps and websites and projections out there that you can use. And what's really kind of incredible about, I say sometimes, like, I feel like I live in the future because this is not stuff that we expected, even 20 years ago. Every single bank, every single brokerage has these tools. So you don't even have to go elsewhere than where you already have your money to have tools to help you with these projections, to help you with these kinds of goal setting, timelining, things like that. Because, if you're on Vanguard, if you're on, Bank of America's website, or there is going to not only be calculators on the website, but there's going to be apps that you can use with a lot of really interesting and important tools that don't even require you to step outside of what you already use. And I think that is really phenomenal and provides us with so much more information than we could have had even 10 years ago.
Yeah. And I think, talking about apps or tools, I think one of the areas of personal finance that they've really evolved for is the whole tracking of where your money's going, or the word budgeting. I've seen people really, they think they'll associate budgeting with restrictions. So I try not to use that word as much, but I think having visibility into where your money's going, and is it going to the right place, or should it be going anywhere different? I think those tools have really evolved a lot because everything back from like the envelope system of putting money in envelopes to, people then doing it in spreadsheets, but it's tedious. And even like some of the tools that, like a Mint or something that'll pull in or aggregate transactions across financial institutions, they're not perfect. So you have to go in and you may have to categorize, and people come back to me and say, do I have to do this for a month, 3 months, for the rest of my life? What do you really recommend when it comes down to getting a handle on where your money's going? So that visibility, that transparency into it, and then going forward, where's the right place? I've come across a lot of people that just have no idea where their money's going. They know they're starting with this, they're ending with this at the end of each month, and what's in between, they don't know. But you go through that exercise, and it's eye-opening for a lot of people. They look at it and they're like, wow, I didn't realize that I was spending this much on this or this. How do you transition from giving someone the visibility to what they've been doing, and then transitioning into this is what you should do and this is how you should track it going forward?
Well, one thing that I think is really helpful is to remember that managing your money is a little bit like laundry, in that it is a task that is never done. When I was in college, I was one of those people who I would get laundry like so piled up that I would run to the Target in town and buy underwear so I didn't have to do laundry. And I would have these like boom and bust laundry cycles. And I finally got kind of disgusted with it and disgusted with myself because I was frustrated, that the shirt that I wanted to wear wasn't clean, that I had to, wear clothes that weren't appropriate for the weather, things like that. Now, how's that related to money management? We have a similar boom and bust cycle with money management if we are not, I know budgeting can be a bad word, but if we're not managing our money. If you are someone who is like, I don't want to think about it, I don't want to look at it, I don't know, this is where I start at the beginning of the month, this is where I am at the end of the month, I'm always a little bit overdrawn. What's happening there is you're having the same sort of like, oh, I just got paid, I feel flush, everything is great, which is like the day after you've done, all of your laundry and everything's clean, to, oh my goodness, I have no idea how I'm going to make it to next month. I've got 47 cents in my pocket. And what am I going to do? So the thing is, that cycle can feel less stressful than actually taking the time once a week to look at your money, because you're like, well, I don't want to think about money. I don't want to think about it. But the thing is, if you can ask yourself, is it really less stressful to have that kind of boom and bust cycle, to have the you overdraw your account and then you're running around like a chicken with its head cut off, trying to get some money to deposit in the account so that you can pay rent and all of that, and you have these fires to put out? Is that actually less stressful than spending 30 minutes once a week looking at your finances. And for most people, they'll be like, oh, yeah, you're right. Like 30 minutes it doesn't sound fun, but it's better than what I'm doing right now. And then, like laundry, if you can just find a way to make it part of your routine, even if you do have a little boom and bust cycle because you get busy one week, it's not going to be the same kind of like, oh no, what am I going to do moment that you had when you were like completely ignoring it until it piled up and you had to deal with it. And then the other thing that I think is really important is there's I don't want to say there's no wrong way to budget because, if bank robbery is part of your budgeting scheme, then yeah, that's a wrong way to budget. But we have this sense that budgeting has to look like a very specific thing. As we think of it as deprivation and spreadsheets. First of all, that's wrong. It's not about deprivation. It's about figuring out how your money can best work for you to get you the things you want. So that's something, if you can start thinking of it that way, to make sure that you get the things that are most important to you in your life, that's what budgeting is. And then spreadsheets are not necessary. Particular tracking, as in like knowing where every penny goes, is not necessary. What you need to know is a general sense of where your money's going and if it fits your values. So if that means just logging onto your bank portal once a week and like looking over all of the various expenditures you've had and going like, okay, yeah, that's about what I want to be doing. Oh goodness, I spent $300 in dining out just this week. That's not what I want to be doing. What I want to do next week. How do I want to shift my behavior? That can be budgeting. It does not have to be an onerous task that takes you all afternoon and you feel terrible about yourself afterwards. It's really just kind of keeping an eye on things and making sure that what you're doing matches what you want.
You talked about budgeting and really gets you to what's important. Let's say someone's going through the exercise the first time and, they kind of going back to the person who wants to retire at 57 or put their kids through college. And maybe they have some other goals as well. And, they can kind of maybe put a cost to those goals and say, all right, to hit those goals, you have to do X, Y, and Z now to get there. But then they look at what they're currently doing and it's not X, Y, and Z. Usually what that means is, okay, they're probably spending that money or it's going to some kind of living expense bucket. Have you seen people have more success if they kind of transition into like a slow transition from what they're currently doing into what they need to do to get to those goals, or cold turkey and just really changing the lifestyle, but it gets them to that, okay, if they have to save X amount here or X amount there? Where do you see people having more success?
The main thing that is really helpful is to remember you want progress, not perfection. Now, for some people, that means like cold turkey, I'm starting over. This is how I need to do things. Because for some people, for whatever reason, they just need to make that change. For others, it has to be a slow ease into things. And so you need to know what kind of person you are. Are you the sort of person who like jumps in with both feet and that works really well and you can keep with it? Or are you the sort of person who really needs to kind of just settle in slowly? In either case, you want to focus on what's going to get you the progress. Now, there are a lot of people who really like making resolutions, like, New Year's resolutions feel great and they are really good about it for 2 or 3 weeks. But by the time February rolls around, they are back to their old ways. And that's what you want to avoid. So what you want to focus on is what's a way that I can make this progress work so that 3 weeks from now, I'm still doing what I started today. Then 6 weeks from now, I'll be doing something that I added. Then 9 weeks from now, I'll be doing 2 things that I've added. So look at it that way as something that you can create in your routine that is sustainable and that will feel good for whatever reason. And eventually, once you get to a certain level where you're making these changes, when you start seeing the results and seeing that, oh, wow, this really is working, it becomes much more exciting and easier to keep going and add more after that. But until you can get to that part where you're like, wow, I really made a difference when I took my credit card information off of my favorite retail sites. It really made a difference when I decided to only have one meal out a week. And, I really have all this extra money at the end of the month and I can send it to my retirement. Until you can get to that point where like, oh, wow, it made a difference. You want to do something that you can keep up no matter what your kind of personality is.
Now, to add another level of complexity, what happens if you have two spouses or partners who are on different wavelengths with in terms of maybe they want to get to the same place, but they just are so ingrained in their money beliefs that one really struggles and may cause friction. Do they both have to be on the same page, or is there a way that they can get to where they're trying to get to with the way that they both think about money?
Well, and I actually think that it's not a maybe, it's a certainty. Two people, when in a relationship, they are coming with completely different money philosophies. They're coming with different psychology when it comes to money. They're coming with different backgrounds with money. And the thing is, like, two people who were raised in the same household will have different views of money. So it's impossible for two people who are in a relationship together to have the same view of money. There are a couple of things that can be very helpful to make sure that you're on the same page. Now, one of them is for you to have compassion for each other when it comes to financial differences, because we tend to have these beliefs about money and we don't really examine them, and we think that they are just what is true about money. And that's partially because in our society, we don't talk about money. And we come up with these beliefs about money when we're children and we don't have a full view of it. So, for a non financial example, my mother likes to tell this story of when she was a little girl. She had this idea that doctors were not allowed to get sick or else they'd go to jail. And it's this funny story about, her belief as a little girl who, was taking the information she was getting and like coming up with a completely weird result. But because we talk about doctors, we talk about illness, and we talk about jail, she was disabused of that notion relatively quickly and was like, oh, isn't that funny that I thought that? But then if we have beliefs about money that are like, I have to hold on to every penny that comes in or else it's going to be taken away. Like, you might have that belief. We don't talk about that. We don't talk about where that comes from. And often that kind of belief comes from financial trauma in childhood. And then you, as an adult, you are navigating the world with that belief system. And your spouse who does not have that belief system is just like, yeah, of course we can spend a little extra money to upgrade our seats. You're like, why are you worried about this? So that sort of thing can cause a great deal of friction. And in part because neither spouse understands that you're speaking different languages. So starting with from a place of compassion of like, okay, I can see this is stressing you out. Why? Can you help me understand? Is really helpful. And then the other thing that I found in my own marriage is starting with a sense of fun can be a great way to get on the same page. So my husband and I kind of got our views aligned when it came to money after a long road trip we took. And I don't remember how we started, but we were on this road trip. There was, it was pre-podcasts, so there was nothing much on the radio. And so we started saying like, all right, top 10 vacation destinations, go. And we had a wonderful time talking about it. And his number one vacation destination was to go to Le Mans in France, which has a 24-hour automotive race because he's an automotive engineer. Now, I majored in French in college, so I was just like, I am down with this plan. I would love to go to France. And so that was like, just started off as a fun conversation. About a week later, after the road trip was over, I said to him, like, how about we start saving like 75 or $100 a month to go to France? And he's like, oh, okay, all right, let's do that. And so we started a targeted savings account, and that seeing that money grow really helped him to see the way that I do things, because I'm much more of the money nerd than the two of us, and helped make it clear that we could be on the same page and work together towards things. And because we were talking about fun stuff, instead of it being like, we got to figure out how to pay medical bill, we got to figure out how to do this, instead of thinking about the deprivation side of it, we were thinking about the fun side of it. That meant that we were in a much better place to start the bigger discussions about the larger financial goals that we have, like retirement and things like that.
The book talks a little bit about gamifying your finances. Is that another way to kind of, have success?
So gamifying your finances does this really neat thing where it gives you external, also known as extrinsic motivation to do something, until that intrinsic motivation comes in, the internal motivation where you go like, oh, wow, it's making a difference. One example of, again, this happening in my life, my husband and I had a home equity line of credit when we were first married that he bought his house in 2005 when they were just throwing bags of money at anyone with a pulse. And so his down payment was a home equity line of credit. Boggles the mind.
Yeah.
So, and when we got married, I was like, I'm really uncomfortable carrying $30,000 in debt on this. Let's work on paying this off. And so we lived on his income and we used mine to work on paying off that debt as quickly as possible. What we did was we had a dry erase board in the kitchen and we drew in a debt payoff thermometer. This was long enough ago that we were still getting statements in the mail. Every time we got a statement from the HELOC, we would fight each other over who got to open it and color in the the thermometer. So something that was not fun. I mean, it's a slog paying this off. We made fun because we had this game. We're trying to beat the thermometer, and we knew about when we expected it to be done, but because we were we want to get there ahead of that, and we're like, oh, I got a little bit extra bonus. We can send 200 of it to the line of credit, things like that. It really changed the way that we looked at this debt payoff, and instead of it being this very boring thing we have to do, it became a game. For people who don't like thinking about money or don't like dealing with their money, looking at it like a game can do a lot to help it feel much more manageable, because again, then it doesn't feel like, oh my goodness, if I do this wrong, everything falls apart. It's more like, oh, okay, it's a game, and if I fall behind, it's okay, I can still win. And then it also gives you a motivation, to get a gold star, to, fill in that debt thermometer, to, to clear all of your bills and have money left over, like it's a Tetris game. That is motivating in a way that just the money itself is not for most people.
Yeah, I could definitely see that being patient. And you can probably come up with all different kinds of ways of doing it, whether it's like you mentioned with the thermometer, but you have scorecards or something. And I think the other thing you mentioned too is that, a good way to get started with your spouse or partner is really focus on something that's fun, the fun aspect of it rather than, and goals, everyone wants to hit those goals, but I think if you really, and probably the fun thing is probably something more short term too, because I think a lot of times people look at some of these goals and they're years and years out, and it's so easy to just say, you know what, we'll get to this next year. And then next year comes and you never really get to it. But if you're really focusing on something at first that's fun, it's probably in the near term. And I forget if it's from Atomic Habits or what book it is, but it's really get a win. You get some momentum and then build on it. And like you mentioned, the small wins eventually become big wins, and you eventually get to where you're trying to go.
Absolutely. Yeah. The psychological boost you get from a small win is just an amazing motivator for going after, then the medium win, then the big win. And then once you kind of have several of those under your belt, you feel very confident and competent, which is one of the problems with money. People often feel like they're not good with money. And the thing is, I would say there's no such thing as good with money, because that doesn't mean any specific thing. I wager that everyone is good with some aspect of money.
Right.
You may feel like you're not good with money, but you know how to find a deal like nobody's business. You may think you're not good with money, but you're really good about figuring out how to borrow from someone. That's there are any number of different things that may be a skill that you have with money. Finding ways to get little wins in areas where you don't feel as confident with finance is a great way to start that ball rolling, to feel confident more in total with money.
Yeah. Well, we're just about out of time. Emily, I want to thank you for being on the show. You gave some great tips on how someone can better manage their money. How best can someone reach out to you, find out more about what you do, or find your book?
Yes, Agents of Wealth listeners can come to my website, and I have a page specifically for you. It's emilyguyberken.com/AOW. And there you can find out both more about me and my books. You can order a copy of my book. I also offer money coaching services. So if you're interested in that, you can sign up there. And I have as well a worksheet on your retirement readiness checklist that you can access there that will help you figure out where you are and what you need to do to be ready for retirement.
Great. We'll link to all that in the show notes. And thank you again, Emily. And thank you, everyone, for tuning in today.
Thank you.
Thank you for listening to the Agent of Wealth podcast. Click the subscribe button below to be notified when new episodes become available. The information covered represents the views and opinions of the guests and does not necessarily represent the views or opinions of Bautis Financial. The content has been made available for informational and educational purposes only and is not intended to be a substitute for professional financial planning and investment advice. Always seek the advice of your financial advisor or other qualified financial service provider with any questions you may have regarding your investments and financial planning.